Thank you for this. Now, that is a very complex task, and GST is even more complex. Why is it complex, and what is it that GST hopes to achieve? GST hopes to bring VAT plus bring all the indirect taxes on one platform. So there is supposed to be simplification, as the Venu has just told you. The question is why VAT? And why VAT now? Why not earlier? Because VAT is a very complex tax. Why is VAT a complex tax? Because here you need both output and input prices. So out of the output you have to subtract the input, then you get the value added, and then you pay the value added tax. So suppose you are a small businessman who are selling this pen. So you sell this pen for 10 rupees, but you bought it from the dealer for 9 rupees. You have some labor charges, some shop rent, you have some other purchases, etc. So to subtract everything, find out that the value added was 50 paisa. So whereas if you are only the output price of 10 rupees, that was simple. But if you have to find out that the value added is 50 paisa, it's very complex. So that's why in India, there has been a demand for implementation of VAT for a very long time. The first time, it was in 1978 under the Indirect Tax Inquiry Committee report by M.K. that it was suggested that we should go for VAT. But they say we have such a large small scale sector, कोई लेथ मशीन पे ऑपरेट करता है, कोई कहीं करता है, उसको ये नहीं पता कि उसका इनपुट कॉस्ट कितना है, तो वो अपना वैल्यू एडेड कैसे कैलकुलेट करेगा? और उस समय 78 में 70% ऑफ द प्रोडक्शन वॉज फ्रॉम द स्मॉल स्केल सेक्टर, तो उस पर वैल्यू एडेड टैक्स लग नहीं सकता है। तो इसलिए उन्होंने कहा कि चलो उसको छोड़ो, एक मैन वैट सजेस्ट किया, मैन्युफैक्चरिंग वैल्यू एडेड टैक्स, जिसको कहा गया मैन वैट। तो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग पे लगा, और वो भी नहीं हो पाया क्योंकि मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में भी बहुत सारा स्मॉल स्केल सेक्टर है, मीडियम स्केल सेक्टर है, जहाँ पे वैल्यू एडेड टैक्स कैलकुलेट करना बहुत मुश्किल है, तो मैन वैट नहीं लागू। तो फिर लॉन्ग टर्म फिस्कल पॉलिसी रिपोर्ट आई 1986 में, तो वहाँ पे सुझाया गया कि मॉड वैट लैवी करना। तो मॉड वैट क्यों? इट्स मॉडिफाइड वैल्यू एडेड टैक्स, मतलब कि मैन वैट भी नहीं हो सकता, तो मॉडिफाइड वैल्यू एडेड टैक्स। तो कहाँ पे मॉडिफाइड वैल्यू एडेड टैक्स? जो 34 वो सेक्टर्स हैं जहाँ पे जो लार्ज स्केल से खरीदते हैं और लार्ज स्केल को बेचते हैं। So it was mode that was initiated in 1986 on 34 different big industries, where purchases were first for big industry and sales were to big industry. And slowly it was spread up to 1997 when self-VAT was introduced. तो आप इससे समझ सकते हैं कि हमारे देश में जहाँ स्मॉल स्केल सेक्टर बहुत ही बड़े स्केल, बहुत ज़्यादा स्मॉल स्केल सेक्टर ऑपरेट करता है, वहाँ पे वैल्यू एडेड टैक्स लेवी करना बहुत ही कठिन है। अब सवाल उठता है कि वैल्यू एडेड टैक्स को लेवी किया जाए, तो उसके भी एक कारण है, जैसे वेनु ने बताया कि देयर आर टू कैस्केडिंग इफेक्ट्स। कैस्केडिंग इफेक्ट का मतलब है कि एक चीज पे टैक्स लगा, वो किसी में इनपुट हुआ तो उस पर टैक्स लगा, तो तीसरे पे लगा, तो चौथे पे लगा, तो टैक्स पे टैक्स लगता जाता है। और एक दूसरा भी कैस्केडिंग इफेक्ट है, इट्स कॉल्ड प्रॉफिट ऑन टैक्स। जब आपका टैक्स से दाम बढ़ गया तो मार्कअप प्राइसिंग में आपका प्रॉफिट भी बढ़ता है, तो प्रॉफिट भी बढ़ता है और टैक्स भी बढ़ता है। तो उससे क्या है, जो इफेक्टिव टैक्स रेट जो है वो ज़्यादा बढ़ जाता है। तो इसलिए सरकार ने कहा कि ये कैस्केडिंग इफेक्ट को हटाने के लिए वैल्यू एडेड टैक्स दुनिया भर में लगाया जा रहा है, हम भी इस पर शुरू कर दें। और इसका दबाव कहाँ से आया? अगर आप देखें तो दबाव इसका बड़ा ज़बरदस्त था IMF से। जब 1991 में हमने कंडीशनैलिटीज एक्सेप्ट की, तो उन कंडीशनैलिटी में एक कंडीशनैलिटी थी कि इंडिया में वैल्यू एडेड टैक्स लगाया जाए। और वो क्यों? ये मल्टीनेशनल कंपनीज को लार्ज स्केल सेक्टर को बहुत सूट करता है, तो उनके लिए ये फायदेमंद होगा। जो स्मॉल स्केल सेक्टर है वो छोड़ दीजिए, लार्ज स्केल सेक्टर, मल्टीनेशनल और बड़ी बड़ी इंडस्ट्रीज उनको फायदा होगा, इससे लगाइए। तो उस समय क्या होता था, जब 1991 में नई आर्थिक नीतियाँ चली, तो उस समय क्रॉस कंडीशनैलिटीज होती थी। क्रॉस कंडीशनैलिटी क्या होती है कि आपको वर्ल्ड बैंक के पास जाना है लोन लेने, कि आपका स्ट्रक्चर एडजस्टमेंट होगा, तो वर्ल्ड बैंक कहता है कि आप IMF की कंडीशनैलिटी फुलफिल करिए, और IMF के पास जाइए कि आपको इमीडिएट एडजस्टमेंट चाहिए, आपका बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट क्राइसिस है, तो वो कहता था कि आप वर्ल्ड बैंक के पास जाइए। तो क्रॉस कंडीशनैलिटी हो गई, यानी एक बोलता था कि दूसरे के पास जाओ, दूसरा बोलता था तीसरे के पास जाओ। और जब WTO आ गया तो एक तीसरी क्रॉस कंडीशनैलिटी हो गई, अगर आप WTO के पास जाएंगे हमारा बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट का प्रॉब्लम है, तो बोलता है कि IMF से पहले सेटल करो। तो एक क्रॉस कंडीशनैलिटी। इन क्रॉस कंडीशनैलिटी में क्या हो रहा था कि जैसे मैंने स्टडी किया कि एनर्जी सेक्टर के लिए इंडिया ने वर्ल्ड बैंक से लोन मांगा, तो उसकी क्रॉस कंडीशनैलिटी क्या थी कि आप आरबीआई को रिफॉर्म करिए, उसको ऑटोनॉमी दीजिए। अब जो एनर्जी सेक्टर का आरबीआई से क्या लेना देना, पर लेकिन वो क्रॉस कंडीशनैलिटी थी। You want in English? Okay. Achha. Okay, so I'll speak in English because I think some people are not able to understand it in Hindi. So cross conditionality means that you go from one international institution to the next, and they have different conditionalities, and you have to fulfill all those conditionalities. So when I studied the energy sector, coal sector specifically, one of the cross conditionality was that you actually have to reform the RBI and give it autonomy. Now, even though coal does not have anything to do with RBI or monetary policy, but that was one of the conditionality. And one other conditionality was that you will implement VAT. So the pressure for implementing VAT in India came actually from the IMF. That was one of its conditionality. And since then, this has been done because this favors the large scale sector and the multinational sector. So it doesn't care about the small scale sector what happens, because the small scale sector in no way can implement that. And that's why under the new GST, they are saying all those with turnover of less than 1 crore need not come under it. At one level it sounds very good that those who are small scale sector will not have to face GST. But at the other level, what happens is that they are out-competed by the large scale sector, which takes advantage of this one single market idea. So one single market idea, as was explained by Venu, means that when you are traveling, your goods are traveling across different states, you do not have to face different kind of burdens. So this idea of one single market is beneficial to the large scale sector, to the multinationals, because for the large scale sector, they take globally and they supply globally. But for the small scale sector, they buy locally and they sell locally. They're not interested in buying from Tamil Nadu something and supplying it in Delhi. They're going to buy from the neighboring market in Delhi and sell in the neighboring market in Delhi. Like when I was coming, there's a Sunday bazaar, there's a Monday bazaar everywhere around here, where you get cheap local food which are produced locally and sold locally. They don't come from Tamil Nadu, they don't come from Maharashtra, etc. They're cheap goods produced, etc. So what is going to happen is that with the implementation of the GST, the large scale and the MNCs are going to benefit from the kind of efficiency that one single market will provide. But all those which are producing in the small scale sector, they will suffer because they are not going to be able to provide that benefit. Therefore, they will have to lower the price. And if they have to lower the price, that means their profitability will be hit. And as it is, small scale sector operates on very low profits. And when that happens, the small scale sector will suffer badly. So therefore, if the small scale sector goes down, what is the consequence? Output will decline. So the government keeps saying output will increase. But if the small scale sector suffers, output will actually decline. Second point is, there is the small scale sector which is the provider of bulk of the employment. The organized sector, in private sector, only has 9.5 million employment out of a market of the labor market of 450 million. So the large scale private sector only employs 3% of the total workforce. It does not employ more than that. So employment, if that is hit, then one of the arguments that the government gives is output will increase and then employment will increase. But if the output of the small scale sector goes down, then employment will be negatively affected. So that argument does not work. Another argument that the government gives is that the prices will fall. Now, why is this argument being given? Because they say that if prices fall, then consumers will be benefited. And if consumers are benefited, it will be good for the country. But the question is, will the prices fall? There is a contradiction in the government stand. Because on the one hand, the government says we will implement a revenue neutral rate. What is the meaning of revenue neutral rate? Whatever was the revenue that was already being collected, we will collect just that much revenue. So if you collect the same amount of revenue, then how can prices fall? So prices cannot fall if you go for a revenue neutral. Secondly, on services, you had a tax of 12%. Now that services price is going to be raised because you are going to raise the indirect tax on services to 18% or whatever rate you decide. Already the services tax rate has gone up to 15.5% in the last 1.5 years because of the various cess, etc. that has been implemented, plus the basic rate has been changed from 12% to 14%. So therefore services prices are rising. Now when services prices rise, that will be inflationary because now services sector is more than 60% 60% of the GDP. And unfortunately, the wholesale price index does not measure services price. In the wholesale price index, there is zero amount of services in it. So that is why the government is playing trick with the public by raising services prices. So if your school fees rise, if your health cost rises, your medical cost rises, your telephone cost rises, your insurance cost rises, your other service cost rise, then that is not reflected in the wholesale price index. It is not reflected in the consumer price index also. Because in the consumer price index, the weighting of services is only 18%, but the production of services is 62%. So therefore there is gross underrepresentation. So therefore services prices are neither reflected fully in the CPI and not at all represented in the WPI. Now, when you raise the services prices, inflation will rise, but it will not reflect in WPI and it will hardly reflect in the CPI. But the actual public will feel the rise in price. So that's why today you are in a situation when the government says WPI is running in negative territory, but the public says prices are rising, their school fees are rising, their hospital costs are rising, everything else that is associated with services like transportation, etc., that is rising. So therefore, what you find is that with the revenue neutral rate, the prices will actually rise. And there's another reason why the prices will rise. That other reason is that you will have one common rate for all the commodities. At the moment you have different rates for different commodities, but now there will be one common rate. When you have one common rate, it will mean that tax rate on the basic commodities will rise, tax rate on the final goods will fall. Now when basic goods prices rise, then they are very inflationary because they feed into the next stage and the next stage. So therefore, this is the second reason. One is services will rise, the other is that because the basic goods prices will rise, therefore that will feed into the inflation and will become an inflationary situation. That's why when I made my presentation in the Rajya Sabha committee, they had called me because of my article in EPW where I spelled out all these macroeconomic consequences. They called me and all the associations like CII, MAID, etc. were all there representing the large scale sector. They all came to me afterwards and said, you are absolutely right. In Canada and other countries, when GST was introduced, the prices rose in spite of revenue neutral rate being implemented. So therefore, the government is not telling the truth when it says prices will fall, when it says output will rise, when it says employment will rise. Actually, the macroeconomic impact will be exactly the opposite. Prices will rise, output will fall because of the impact of the small scale sector, employment will fall because of that. Now, if this happens, then in a situation like today, where industrial sector is barely growing at 1 or 2%, except for 1 month in which it grows by 9%, but subsequently had negative this thing, industry is facing a demand problem. And when industry is facing a demand problem, and you further reduce demand by implementation of the GST, because the small scale sector will be very badly hit, then the recession will only increase. And if the recessionary conditions strengthen, then investment cannot rise. Because as it is, investment is a problem today. Investment, you know that it peaked in 2007-8 at 38%, and after it fell to 28%, and currently it's running at 30%. So it is down by 8 percentage points as compared to 2007-8. And that's why the Indian economy is not doing very well. And that's why the government is constantly trying to revive private investment, but private investment is not reviving because of the demand problem that is faced in the Indian economy. So the implementation of the GST can actually aggravate that problem further by creating more uncertainty and by creating more problems for the small scale sector and for the demand in the economy. So in that sense, again, the problem is that the demand, the investment, they both can actually come down as compared to going up. So at the macro level, the GST's consequence will be exactly the opposite of what the government is trying to spell out. Now, the next issue is that will the GST simplify taxation. Today in industry, suppose you are producing plastics, so at the factory gate you have to pay excise duty, and then when you go and sell it, it has to pay sales tax. Octroi has been eliminated all over the country. There is no octroi left anywhere. Octroi was last octroi was eliminated in Maharashtra in 2013 from Pune and Bombay. Otherwise, octroi is gone. So octroi doesn't come in. Now, under the new GST, what do you have? You have a central GST called CGST and a state GST called the SGST, and then there is a third called IGST. So you have these three taxes. So in what way does the simplification take place? Because it's not entertainment tax that they have to pay, it's not the other property tax that they have to pay, or the stamp duty duty, etc. they have to pay. But government is saying 17 taxes will be brought on one platform. But the manufacturer is not paying 17 taxes. Manufacturer is paying 3 taxes or 4 taxes. If you go to the cinema hall, there you may pay entertainment tax or 1 or 2 other taxes. You know, countervailing duty may be there, but countervailing duty is part of the customs. That can be simplified in a different way. So it's not that the structure be simplified. Plus, for even the large scale industry, even though they have good accountants and so on, they have to maintain very solid accounts. If you take a taxi ride, then how much is the service tax on the taxi ride? That will be have to be accounted. If you buy paper, then how much is the tax you pay on paper? That will have to be accounted for. So massive accounting will take place. So it's not to there be any simplification. As I said, VAT is a very, very complex tax, and its implementation is not going to be easy. And the government is not yet prepared for the kind of computerization that is required to actually implement this tax. And this is something that people from the Central Excise and Customs have told me, that we are not yet ready for the implementation of this very complex tax as to how to take all the input credits and how to then implement it. So the point is, when you bring central GST in lieu of excise duty, state GST in lieu of sales tax and service tax also, and then IGST. Okay. Then this itself makes a very complex thing, because where do you collect the tax? The sales tax man does not know how to collect excise duty, but he has to collect the CGST. And the excise duty man does not know how to collect the sales tax, but he has to collect the SGST. So again there will be complication. That how this collection will take place, which agency will collect the tax, there is no clarity on that also. So in other words, this complex tax will create problem for collection. Now one other thing that the government says is that this will help to curb the black economy. How will it help to curb the black economy? Because I am taking a bill from you, because I have to take credit in the next step. So they say that you will take a correct credit. Otherwise what is happening today is under invoicing and over invoicing of all bills. So if I am taking a bill from you, okay, you are under invoicing and I am over invoicing, and there is no way of matching the two. So government saying now there will be a trade because I will be able to match the two. But the government doesn't realize that in such a complex tax, you can always create fictitious bills. So like for instance, in the case of gold import, today what do you have? For gold import, you have to pay a tax. When you import the gold, there is a tax. Now what people do, they make fuzzy purchase, and therefore they bring in say 1 ton and create a purchase of 1 ton and use that for 5 other tons. So therefore you pay 1/5 the tax, and that's why smuggling of gold is continuing in spite of this provision being there. So here also you can create fictitious bills, and this is very widespread in our business, that you create fictitious bills. This is called double entry books. So you have one book for the income tax department and one book for your own accounting, and that's why you find in India that the actual profit of a company is not known. And that's why all big business houses break up after the patriarch dies. So when Mr. Dhirubhai Ambani died, then Anil Ambani and Mukesh Ambani fell apart. When Sriram died, then the three Sriram brothers fell apart. Similarly, Mafatla, similarly Sarabhai, similarly all the... Why? Because the fight is over the black profit, not the white profit. White profit is the declared profit which you can share, but the black profit is the undeclared profit. And how do you generate this undeclared profit? Through under-invoicing and over-invoicing. And there are millions of ways. There are as many ways of under-invoicing and over-invoicing as the number of industries. So when the government says that the black economy will be tackled, that also is not sure. And in many countries it has been seen that as that has been implemented, black income generation is increased rather than decreased. So this business that your bill will become my bill, that does not work. Because businessmen are clever people and they can obviously do all these funny things. Then the next issue that comes up is fiscal decentralization. India is a federal entity where center and states have assigned powers, and within states there are different requirements, and that's why states have a certain degree of autonomy. So the problems of Assam are not the same as problems of Maharashtra. The problem of Jammu and Kashmir is not the same as the problem of Tamil Nadu. So therefore, you cannot have one single platform on which everybody can be there. So fiscal federalism will suffer as a result of one common tax. CGST, SGST, all at one common platform, one common tax. That will mean the specific requirements of different kinds of states will not be fulfilled. Then not only that, there is a third tier federal structure. The first tier is central, second is states, and the third is the local bodies. Now local bodies do not come into the picture at all in this scheme of things. Local bodies, how they will get their taxes, how the sharing will be done with the local bodies by the states, that is not in it. So therefore, the third tier can suffer as a result of all this. So in other words, the various claims that the government has made do not stand scrutiny, and the question arises, then why are we going in for this? Okay, one more thing, revenue neutral rate. As I said, the revenue neutral rate is something which is implemented so the government does not lose tax revenue. That means you must levy that rate at which you can collect the same amount of tax that you were collecting earlier. So what should this revenue neutral rate be? If it is 27%, it will be very high. Even if it's 18%, it will still be very high. In most other parts of the world, it is levied at about 10 to 12%. But the point is, that the states are worried that at this level, they will begin to lose revenue, and they are overly dependent on the center for their revenue, and this will make them further dependent on it. So center is trying to assure the states that if you lose revenue, we will compensate you for it. But the question is, if they or states are losing revenue, and the center says that we will try to compensate for it, then where is the center going to get the revenue from? Its fiscal deficit will rise. Because after all, if the states are losing, getting the SGST, the center will also lose, getting the CGST. So if the center is losing and the states are losing, then where will center compensate for? So the only way to compensate is through direct taxes. You raise direct taxes. But there is nothing on the direct tax front, because this concerns the indirect taxes, not the direct taxes. So how to raise direct taxes? For that you require to have reform of direct taxes, but there is no talk of that, even though we have the direct tax code about which we are talking since 2005, but it has not been implemented, and there is no way that they are going to implement it, because that would mean that direct tax for businesses will rise. So therefore that is also not going to happen. So in other words, even from a fiscal standpoint, the implementation of GST will raise a lot of uncertainty about the rise of the fiscal deficit. That if the revenue neutral rate does not turn out to be right, then the problem will be that you will have a fiscal deficit which will start rising, and at which point the center and the states will lose. And how would center correct for its rise in the fiscal deficit? By cutting expenditure on the social sector. That is how we have seen in the last 25 years, every time the fiscal deficit rises, the best way to keep the fiscal deficit target is to cut the planned expenditure, capital account expenditure, and expenditures in the social sector. These are the three major areas where the cut takes place. But the moment you do that, you create recessionary tendencies in the economy, or you strengthen the recessionary tendency. So at a macro level, that will also not work. So therefore, this whole thing is the government is pushing for. Why is it pushing for it? Why is it not done its homework? And the reason is pressure from IMF, pressure from the World Bank, and the lobbies outside. And second is pressure from our big business, that they want this implemented. So in today's Times of India, you have an article by Bansal, the fellow who started Flipkart. And you know, if you look at the picture that he's painting, what is the picture he's painting? You will have a storehouse, a warehouse, which will be 8 times the football field. And on one side you will have an airport, on the other side you will have a big railway siding, on the other side you will have 8-lane highway, and on the other side you will have factories feeding the warehouse. This is precisely what they want. They want total centralization. So that production will be centralized, in the large-scale sector, distribution will be centralized in the large-scale sector, and whatever happens to small-scale traders, etc., is not their concern. So you know that how India has about 35 million small-scale traders. Employment in the small-scale trade is 35 million. Now suppose you have this model of big warehouses, big business and so on. And what is the best example of that? The best example of that is Walmart, the biggest retailer in the world. So what does Walmart do? I looked at the statistics for 2010. It used to sell $450 billion worth of goods. What was India's sales in that year? $600 billion. Okay. So India's total sales, retail sales was $600 billion, whereas Walmart is selling $450 billion. India was employing 35 million people, and how much was Walmart employing? 2.5 million. So to sell $600 billion worth of goods, it would have had to employ only 3.5 million. But the total employment in this sector is 35 million. So where will 32 million people go? So if you centralize in this way, production, distribution, finance, transportation, then you are going to decimate the small scale sector, which is the backbone of employment generation, which is the backbone of income of the largest majority of the people. 94% of the workforce works in the small scale and the organized sector. So in other words, the conditions, we have to ask the question, from whose point of view is GST good? From the point of view of big business, from the point of view of the multinational. They are the ones who benefit out of it and they are pushing hard for it. But why is the national government not doing it? And there is almost a complete consensus among the political parties. Congress party, which started the GST, that time BJP was opposing it. Today, the Congress party is opposing it not because it doesn't like the GST. It's opposing it for political reasons because it does not want BJP to get the credit for having passed the GST. But otherwise, amongst the political parties, even the left is now saying, okay, let's have the GST. Because they are saying that our finance minister, Ashim, was the chairman of the empowered group of ministers which proposed the GST. So even they are trying to claim credit. So CPM is also trying to claim credit. Janata Dal United, Nitish Kumar is also supporting it. Mamata Banerjee is also supporting it. Only Tamil Nadu is opposing it. So why is Tamil Nadu opposing it? Because of the division between the producing states and the consuming states. The producing states will lose because it's the final state that the tax will be paid. So the final state will be the consuming states. So that's why UP, Bihar, that they will benefit. But they are so short-sighted that they don't see that when small-scale sectors hit, the cottage sectors hit, Bihar and UP will be hit the most. But that is not coming into the discussion at all. So in other words, Tamil Nadu is opposing because it wants compensation as a producing state. And one or two other states will oppose it because of that reason. But the point is, otherwise it's a complete political consensus. That all political parties, once their conditions are met, will push for GST. Because today there is nobody who represents the interests of the small scale, the cottage sector and the other marginalized sectors of our society. So this implementation of GST represents the complete marginalization of those who are in the margins. And this is the way the new economic policies have proceeded for the last 25 years. That if you are at the margin, you become more marginalized. And this is what Samuelson captured in his idea that markets run on dollar vote. So what is the dollar vote? If you have $1 in your pocket, you have one vote. If you have $1 million, you have 1 million vote. So who determines what the markets will do? Those who have purchasing power. So if I have purchasing power, I can buy a Mercedes-Benz car. But if I don't have purchasing power, I can't buy food. So the markets are determined by those who have purchasing power. And that is what is coming through in the last 25 years. And that is what is coming through also in the GST. That basically it is those with the large purchasing power, those who are in the large scale sector, the foreigners and the multinationals, they are able to push their agenda onto the country. And this is where we need a much wider debate. So I wrote a piece first on this issue of VAT in 1986 in EPW when the mod VAT was introduced. And I showed why revenue neutral rate will not lead to price decrease. I wrote other articles several times in Bharti Samajik Chintan and so on. And again last year in July in EPW I had a piece where I showed all these macroeconomic consequences. I had pieces in the Tribune and the Hindu. Unfortunately, nobody is picking up this issue in the way it should be picked up from the point of view of the marginalized. And this shows the bankruptcy of our politics. That in the politics of today, it's only the interest of the large scale sector that matters, but everybody else is marginalized. Thank you very much.